Dear all, welcome back to the third session of this EBT webinar. I'm going to introduce Frederick, who is going to be the host of this session. Frederick is a researcher from the National Aerospace Center, the Royal Aerospace Center of Holland. He has a bachelor degree in the Technical University on aerospace engineering. He has also a Master of Science of, again, aerospace engineering, air transport and operation. He joined the National Aerospace Center, the NLR, back in 2013, and since then he's been working in the NLR. He is a EBT member in the rulemaking task 0599 for EASA, and he developed the ICAP concept, as well as the other elements regarding the data science and the data related to EBT. And then the co-host is Andy Mitchell. He's the Atpg chair. Atpg is Aircrew Training Policy Group. Well, he has several positions throughout his career. He started as a pilot in 2001, and then he has also he participated, or he has an education in the University of Southampton in aeronautics and astronautics. He's an EBT core group member, and he joined or he helped during the rulemaking task of EBT. He is also he was an EasyJet pilot and a captain, a flight standard captain, and an instructor. A commander and a line training captain in EasyJet. So welcome both of you. Frederick, I give you the floor because I understand that you're going to start running the show.
Yep, absolutely. And just before we start, I'd like to invite all the panel hosts, panel members to put on their webcams as well, and we can all be part of the same discussion. So, and Frank, welcome you up on the stage here. And so the first thing that we wanted to talk about was talking about this also a little bit of privacy and all that. And I think that's one question also, actually to kick off with you, Francisco. If we're looking at the regulations, there's one of I think it's GM2 or OFC 231 in Charlie. There's a mention between de-identified and anonymized data. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? I know you touched on it somewhat, but just to kind of maybe lay out again what's the difference between different levels of anonymity and also maybe what EASA's take is on deciding those levels.
Should we start?
Yeah, it's a question for you.
Yeah, no problem. Ascanio, should I start?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Regarding the different levels of grading, well, this is already covered in the regulation, and I think I already explained a little bit in my presentation. I was preparing here the cameras and everything. Can you repeat me again?
So it's more about trying to maybe just lay out again the lines between saying you've got like unedited data, you've got de-identified data, you've got anonymized data. What are the different flavors that you see at EASA, and
yeah,
so on what direction you would?
Thanks, Frederick. Because apologies, because before we were preparing here the technical aspect. We are very clear about that in regulation. We strongly recommend to not be anonymized, but to be de-identified, because that will allow the operator to gather some insights in the data. When you anonymize the data, it's impossible to have, let's say, any metadata, while with the identification you can ensure the protection of the individual, but at the same time be useful. So very clear in the regulation and in the AMC, to be more specifically, and in the GM, we discuss about de-identified data, and we do not recommend de-anonymized data. I hope it clarified. I don't know, Ascanio. Okay, so back to you, Frederick, and I don't know if any of the operators or any other wants to provide a little bit of input here.
No, I appreciate that clarification as well. And actually, we also talked a little bit about data security, data privacy, and talking about the role of the unions and their perspectives. I think Frank, you also elaborated on that. But maybe one of the questions that'd be interesting to pose to you, Frank, if you think about this from the pilot's perspective, because the unions have an opinion, of course, also as being representatives for the pilots. But
can you put it a little bit?
Have you been able to explore how pilots see the balance between data being collected about them versus having information that they can develop themselves about? Has it been well received, or what's your experience there?
Yeah, at first, at the beginning of our EBT implementation at Lufthansa, of course, there were many concerns about now collecting data about me as a pilot. I'm a good pilot, and nobody needs any data of me. But we made we had many slots at pilot meetings where the flight ops department performs meetings with the pilots regularly at regular times, and then we had a slot and we presented EBT from the beginning. And the most important thing, as already mentioned in my presentation, was that we have this agreement that no disciplinary superior has access to the data, and that was the key point. And there we also got the pilots, and and right now they are more interested in about how do I perform in relation to the other pilots, and how can I perform better. And and now we have other discussions than in the past, because now the pilot knows in the last module I got a 4 in competency, and I now got a 3. Oh, what was the reason? How can I improve? What did I do wrong compared to the other module? And so the pilots do more reflect about their personal competence.
Great. That's actually quite interesting. What you're saying is that they kind of on board onto that idea of this data being there for development and not there to control and to check. And Ignacio, do you echo that experience? I mean, remember the last webinar we had, I believe the first Appendix 10 approved a pilot, validated pilot within the panel. But would you echo that is also your experience, that pilots also see this as a field of improvement, and that they also they're sitting on that side of the balance of privacy versus insight?
Yeah, hi Frederick. Glad to see you. Well, switching from legacy training to these EBT programs is a massive change in the airline. So I think it's absolutely paramount that before going to that, you have a couple of chats with unions and with the pilot representatives. So absolutely everybody is agree what was going to be the plan, because on EBT there's a lot of data. There's going to be a lot of data gathering, and there's a lot of concern of what was going to be the use of this data. And my advice is don't jump on this step. But the first thing to do in a program of these characteristics is having these conversations with unions and with pilot representatives. We had this in 2016. We have a couple of meetings. We explained how was going to be our system until we all agreed we were absolutely happy with the treatment, all data gathering, all database of the pilots we're going to have. We didn't begin the implementations. And in the end, as I have explained, database of the pilots in Iberia are completely confidential. Nobody has access to this database but the pilots themselves and the EBT manager for the training, tailored training purposes in case of this criteria I explained before is satisfied. So absolutely, this is to improve safety in the end, and this is the goal of EBT. And the one who has to be really happy is the pilot. This is for the pilots to improve the safety, to upgrade the performance, and who needs to feel absolutely safe are them. So this is a total discussion that the airlines has to have with the unions and representatives.
Perfect, thanks. Well, then I think both of you echo comparable solution. It's probably good to get the pilots on board quite early, but it's also nice to hear that they also see this that way. And so I think that's probably one of the key takeaways in any case. for today. Just to jump onto that, so one thing is, of course, the idea of collecting the data. The second is, what do we do with this data? What can we do with the data? There are actually two questions on this. But first, I want to double back, and I think Ignacio would be fair to ask this to you. When I think when we were preparing this webinar, one of the things that you also were entertaining is like showing like what are the data insights that you got from your grading system. And we thought it'd be actually quite interesting to share that, but not to have this webinar cover data analysis as well, because that's too big of a topic. I know we took out 2 slides, and Frank, the same for you. So if it's okay, I'd like to put up the slide, and maybe you can just explain a little bit about one of these insights that you can share about what your data system has allowed, your grading system has already allowed you to learn and to see. So I'll just put it up on the presentation so that you can and then you can quickly explain what's on there. It's right over here. You should be able to see it now.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, see, absolutely. Well, this is a very good example of what EBT is. In the end, what we have been saying is this webinar this afternoon, the important thing is, first of all, you need to know your database is completely reliable, 100%, and that you have quality data. Once you are totally sure you've got it, then about data, the sky's the limit. It's just a question of resources. So where are you going to stop analyzing? This is an example of data extracted from Iberia from 3 years, whole 3 years of mixed EBT. This is de-identified data, obviously, and it's an isolated population, just only for this demo purposes. And we can see in this case is the percentage of grade 2s over 3 years given to this population. In the upper side of the table, it's a high level of 2s grading for the pilots, and below is a less level of 2s given to the pilots. And we have seen the grade 2 assigned on day 1 and also assigned on day 2. On the left hand side of the table would be the module 1. This is the shift between the legacy training to our first mixed EBT, and we can see in module 2 is the first year already mixed EBT, how there's a really very big improvement once the pilots begin to train in competencies compared with the beginning of the project and with the time they were in legacy. So we can see a very high drop on 2s assigned to the pilots. So that's a really good sign and a very good improvement from the moment we began to train and to assess in competencies. Then when you are analyzing these trends in the mid-run or in the long run, you have always to be paying attention to events. So we can see here an event that is something weird in day 1 when there's a valley in the grade 2 assigned on day 2 in this module 2, compared with the module 3, 4, or even 5, when the percentage of grading 2 given to the pilots on day 1 reach a normal threshold. In this case, there's a problem with the module design. The module design was too easy for a day 1 evaluation. We need to understand that in the early stages, when you are in mixed EBT, everybody is learning. It's going to be learning the pilots, it's the trainer learnings, it's you as an EBT manager learning, and it's the module designs learning. So we can see here very clearly this event, this valley, when there was an issue with the module, and we already learned from that. Then we go to the module 3, 4, or even 5, when we can see that the percentage of grade 2 assigns to on day 1 reach a very good threshold to us, compared with the gradings given to pilots on day 2. This gap for us in proportion is really healthy, as on day 1 is where it should be more 2s than on day 2, as in day 1 is the day that is specifically designed to detect the learning opportunities, the training needs in the pilots, and the second day is the day to fix it. So we can see as during the module 3, 4, 5, the gap keeps on, and also on module 6, and it's a sign of a healthy system in which on day one you have a certain rate of tools in a threshold you see or you think is acceptable, and during day two these tools decrease a lot, drops a lot. In one side because this tailored training needs has been addressed, and in the other because we need to understand that the mechanics and the philosophy of observation of a day one eval and a day two training are completely different. And then it comes at COVID-19, and we can see module 5 and module 6, as everybody has forecasted, when the level of percentage of tools begins to climb because of this lack of flying that in the end was affecting the training. That in fact what we can see here is a translation, or is a transfer from standard 3s to minimum acceptable tools. We can also take this data analysis and we can be doing a comparison between, for example, instead of these tools, we can make a comparison between 4 and 3s, and we will be seeing exactly the same thing, a transfer between people who before COVID-19 had the competency in a level 4, and then during the COVID descent to a level 3.
Yeah.
This is exactly a good example of what data can do. The important thing is the sky's the limit. What are your resources? What you want to stop? And the most paramount thing, as Ascanio explained, is you need your database to be absolutely reliable. If not, if you cannot guarantee that, this is really beautiful, but it's not more than smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's fascinating because it's just interesting to see that you've got one graph here, and from this one graph, you've already been able to expand on a lot of different things. Talking about modules, reflecting on the module design, reflecting on events like COVID, and looking also at the learning effects between day 1, day 2. And so that's actually quite powerful. And this is just one of, I think, a lot of different graphs and visualizations that are possible. So, and I need to be mindful of the time because we need to move on with other questions in a sec. But Frank, I want to give you an opportunity also to maybe just reflect on what kind of insights you've also been gathering and the way that you use the data, because I think it's just an interesting example to then reflect back to the grading system. So, and I know that this is one part of the Q&A that we prepared. So it seems artificial to the audience. It might be, but it's so interesting that we thought we wanted to share this with you. So let me just quickly move on to this next section that I wanted, Frank, that maybe you could just expand on. That was this graph. So just briefly over to you, 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's just an example of how to analyze the average competency grading of the pilots. Here it's just a draft or an example. You can see 3 EBT programs. Let's call them program 1, 2, and 3, with green, gray, and blue shaded areas. And there you can see just on the left-hand side, maybe something like a lower grade. On the right-hand side, the grade is getting better. And there we can see, for example, in procedural handling, from one module to the next ones, the performance is improved by the pilots. And how do we use at Lufthansa these analysis? For example, as you can see in flight path management automation, we see a drop from the first to the second program. There the performance decreased, and then we go deeper, one level deeper, and we look at the different groups. So maybe this drop only results from, let's say, the first officers on the 340, and all the other groups maybe don't have any issues with the flight path management automation in this program, in this second EBT module. So, and then we can discuss how to improve the flight path management automation performance, and to design some scenarios in the next EBT module, especially for the first officers in this point of the 340, for example, to improve their FPA performance. And so that's an overall glance of view, and then we go one step deeper into the different groups in order to analyze this level 1 analysis. What performance has to, what competency has to be trained in order to improve the performance.
Yeah. So again, yeah. So I think that and it's a nice next example actually where Ignacio also looked at the distributions of grade 2s over time. Here we also see something over time, but we can also see that's across different competencies. Like you say, going into demographics allows you to really identify what we need to do in the next module. And I think that's and there's another whole chapter on observable behaviors. I think also where we can talk about analytics, but these are two really cool examples that you guys already had. So thanks for being able to share that. Let me just quickly close the screen here and just jump to the last question before we start segueing off into the next chapter. There was a question actually from Peter Marichon, which I think was quite a good question and tags into what you were just talking about, Frank, about tailored training. The question was, Peter's wondering how are scenarios composed for the specific crews to emphasize the competencies but still be a realistic scenario. So it's part of it's a two questions, but I think one of the things is if you've got 2 crew members and they have 2 different training needs, can you still train them in a single scenario, or how do you manage that? So Frank, maybe just quick 30 seconds. How do you manage combining those 2 training needs in, for instance, the day 2 program, or do you do that do you solve that problem in another way?
No, as I showed in the presentation, there was this little matrix of the second day, and we have altogether 4 slots, 4 different scenarios in the second day. And the 4th one, there was also a question from Michel Lacombe concerning the 4th scenario. That's a scenario that's blocked or reserved for something that we have to train with all pilots, despite of their performance of the first day. Maybe there is some new type of approach to be trained or something like this, and every pilot has to train it. That's in the 4th scenario-based training slots on the second day. And the 3 other slots that can be combined by the instructor. So he can say, okay, the first slot I will use for the captain's training, tailored training, and on the second slot of this EBT module of the second day, he can train the first officer, and maybe in the 3rd one he can train both or the captain again. So he can decide with the 3 first scenarios of the scenario-based training. He can decide which pilot to train.
Perfect. Yeah, so that's quite a lot of configuration work actually that an instructor needs to do. Ignacio, just on your side, just briefly, 30 seconds. How do you do this with Iberia? And there's a second part of Peter's question which might be interesting. At what point does that day 2 instructor, because the instructors I believe are different, day 1, day 2 in Iberia, what is when does he get let's say the lesson plan or the briefing? Is it the day before, or is it in the beginning of that same session? What so just briefly just on that.
Well, that's a very interesting question and a very complicated one, because designing a sim session for tailored training to pilots is really complicated, because if you're going to change all that things in the end, you have to be always looking to the 3-year program. So the pilot has to be compliant with all the topics throughout the 3 years. So you have to be completely sure that you are removing or eliminating topics of this pilot that has to comply within throughout the 3 years. So it comes to a very complicated design, and it comes to a very complicated workload. So this is kind of the holy grail. This is a very interesting thing for the future, how to design really powerful tailored training for a crew, from the point of view of a crew, not to a pilot, being sure that you are still compliant, you are not missing topics in the 3-year programs of each one of the pilots. In our case, the situation is more easier, because if we are tailored training at level 2, as we do later on, 1 month, a month and a half, we can tailor train personally. So we design a sim session for that pilot. It's only going to be for the whole pilot, the 3 hours. So it's a totally personalized tailored training in just that competency for the pilot. If we want to go further, even to tailored training pilots on 3 or even pilots in 4, then we rely on data, and we are able to ask the data what's going to be the most successful sim session for these 2 pilots that are 3s, or these 2 pilots that are 4s, that they don't have clearly learning opportunities, as they are standard plus. But as the software is able to read all the historics of both pilots, they can tell us both pilots combined, this is the most powerful tailored training for them. Do this or do that. But
Nice.
a very interesting question and a lot of things to analyze for the future in that thing.
Predictive scenario design.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
pretty cool. Yeah. So let me just finish up, and then I'm going to hand it over to Andy. Andy, just actually, as we're segueing into variation of grading systems, one question for you, maybe to chip off the block. What are the classic mistakes that you see from the Atpg perspective when it comes to variations in grading systems? So people can move with EASA or away from EASA or do different things. What are maybe the one or two things that you think are people, you would almost warn people for?
Frederick, thanks. That's a good question. And I've been really enjoying sitting here listening, and it's time for me to work a bit now. So thanks very much for that one. From the Atpg experience, we're not seeing many issues with the level 0 grading. The competent, not competent is pretty clear. It's binary, no problems. And even at level 1, the competency grading, that's also been pretty clear. There was a question that came in to the Q&A, actually, I'd like to just address now, that was to do with the not observed level in the competency grading. The question was whether or not that's clouding the data, and I think from our experience we'd say the opposite. The not observed grading is actually doing the opposite of that. It's actually helping to make the data more clear, and it was really great to see both Lufthansa and Iberia adopting that process as a best practice. What it allows the instructors to do is to say if they don't see a particular competency, to actually be able to state that, and that's great for things like module design, making sure there's exposure to competencies, and also in case instructors really just don't quite understand how to grade a certain competency. It's great feedback, and if you don't have that, it's a real loss. Going on from there, I think possibly the area we're seeing the most potential for education and alignment, and also perhaps very powerful data insights, is the OB level, the level 2 data. And in terms of mistakes, not to be negative about it, but some of the things we're seeing perhaps in the industry right now is people removing OBs, changing the sense of the OBs, and those things are areas where you're going to end up getting into the Altmach territory, as was discussed earlier by EASA, and that's just an area to be aware of. You're moving away from that nice continent that Francisco mentioned earlier, and into an area where you're more on your own. So that's an area just to be careful about. And I'll come back to the Altmach in a second as we move into this next section as well, Frederick. One last thing to maybe actually do, and I'd like to perhaps talk a bit about ORCA as well, just very briefly, is not only is it about getting the right level of OBs, and we would certainly recommend the EASA standard set of OBs, but also it's how you gather the OBs as well. And it was great to see both with Ascanio and also seeing it more in practice with Ignacio's presentation, the idea of classifying the OBs after the sim session, keeping the workload down on the instructor. So that's an area I think that should be sort of focused on with the operators as well. Perhaps I could just also now sort of flip this round and redirect towards EASA, if that's okay, because there was another question that came in to do with level 3 data. And perhaps either for Ascanio or for Francisco, we had a question came in from Pieter-Jan de Jager regarding the level 3 data metrics. To summarize that, he says that IATA details TEM metrics as level 3, so threat and error management metrics in level 3. Could I just ask maybe the question to summarize, are EASA aligned with this? And also, what are EASA's overall thoughts on the sorts of other data they expect to see in the level 3 data set?
Thanks, Andy. Ascanio? Yeah? Okay. Sorry, yeah. Yes, thank you very much for the question. The question is very interesting, and we thought since the beginning when we introduced the idea of level 3 that one of the use will be specifically the threat and error management model. And maybe, and again, I am not flying these rules, and I don't dare to tell you guys in this specific question what the operator should do or not do. Level 3 is very performance-based. It allows many things, but our idea, and obviously the industry is much more expert than us, it would be that they record, for example, if a particular pilot in a particular scenario, they reach I don't know, an undesired aircraft state, or they trap the error right at the beginning. And this type of level 3s for that purpose. Obviously, the level 3 is not only about threat and error management, as correctly you pointed out, and that person pointed out. Is it can be used in many other ways, but it's absolutely a very well used thought to combine the level 3 with the threat and error management, and let's say the different phases throughout the threat and error management model. But again, I encourage the industry to tell us what is the best way to do, because we are here to serve in the regulation, the industry, and for the benefit of all. And the expertise is on your side, on the industry side, on how best to implement this level 3 related to the threat and error management model. Scania, yeah? Okay, go back to you, Andy.
Thanks, Francisco. So just probably in summary then, as you said, TEM is something which is promoted by IATA at level 3. It sounds like it's compatible with the EASA, but also just to also summarize perhaps from what we saw Lufthansa and Iberia earlier, we've also seen other ways of doing level 3, such as the questions. We saw the yes and no questions from Frank, and from Iberia with Ignacio, there's like the repeat data, which is also de-identified on both sides. So that sounds like, as you say, some best practices emerging, and that'd be good to see how it goes. And perhaps actually we could just build on that. Yeah, please, Francisco, go ahead. Yeah.
And maybe as we are developing the EBT manual together with the industry, and you are the chair of the Atpg. Maybe this is something that we could maybe make it more visual at the EBT manual, not maybe for this early version that is about to be finished, but maybe for the second version, a second iteration of the EBT manual. So Christian Norden, I don't know if he's here, but maybe this is a good takeaway from this webinar.
Thanks, Francisco. That's great. And maybe we could go on to talk about that a little bit now. So we're talking about the feedback from the industry in terms of perhaps how we could evolve grading systems in the future and how they're best using those. So maybe, Frank, I could ask you a question with Lufthansa. How has your grading system evolved over time? Are there any lessons that you've learned within Lufthansa that you've now applied to improve and to develop your grading system more as a evolutionary process across time?
Yeah, we had at the beginning we thought the more data is the best data. So the more data to collect is the best thing, and then at the beginning we started to grade the OBs. So we also used the 5-point grading scale with the OBs, and that became something like a hiccup because OBs were not defined and are not defined to be graded. And then after about 1 year or 1.5 years of performing the grading of the competencies, we changed the methodology. So as I showed, then we changed over to the marking of the OBs. And so that was something like an evolution in our grading system. So now we have less information out of the OBs, but they are less only from an outside view. From an inside view, we still got the information that we need with the plus, the neutral, or the minus.
Great, Frank. That's interesting because we saw that also in Ignacio's presentation too. That both I think both airlines have gone for that standard sort of best practice of the negative, neutral, and positives. That's interesting. That's come from two different airlines, and you've sort of come together with realizing that's perhaps a best practice going forwards, which is great to see. Did you, from your perspective, Frank, did you need to apply for an ALTMOG for your grading scale? Was there anything that you changed away from EASA? I saw that it was all in English, and it looks like quite EASA standard, and the German came down at level 3 information. But yeah, how did you make any adjustments at all?
Yeah, the only thing that we adjusted, so we are using the EASA competencies, we're using the EASA OBs. The only thing that we were adding is that we call it a shortcut, because many OBs have a very, very long description, and the instructor doesn't have the time to read the description every time he wants to think about or mark an OB. And therefore, we made something like a shortcut. So, for example, maintains the intended flight path during flight using automation while managing other tasks and distractions. It's a very long OB, and we added a shortcut which is called maintaining flight path. So the instructor then knows, okay, maintaining flight path, that's the OB I need. And so we had for all the OBs a shortcut maximum of, let's say, 3 words or 4 words at the maximum. And
interesting, Frank. Thank you. That's an interesting way to help with the instructor buy-in and workload, isn't it? To try to give them shortcuts. That's always a good way to go. And also a very good point, because in that case you're not changing the sense of the OB, so that's basically you're still aligned on that. Ignacio, how about from your side, from Iberia's side, did you make any changes on the competency framework, the grading system from EASA?
Well, as in our presentation, you have seen our motto is keep it simple. So since the very beginning, we thought that the OROFC 231 has a really good guidance on grading and OBs. So we didn't even try to translate to Spanish. We have translated directly to our competency chart into English. So now we haven't made absolutely any change. So we have it as it is implemented in the OROFC 231.
Fantastic, thank you. That's great to hear that, Ignacio. So yeah, very aligned on both sides there between Lufthansa and Iberia. That's interesting to hear. Maybe we could turn back to EASA then and just ask a question back to the regulators along the lines of that. So it sounds like from the grading system for Iberia and Lufthansa, there's no outmock required. It's effectively following the recommended EASA grading system. Have you had any outmocks come in at all from airlines in the realm of grading systems? And if so, could you maybe just elaborate on some of those ideas that are coming in from the industry?
Thanks, Andy. Yes, we have several mocks either already approved or either in the process to be approved. I have to say that regarding specifically the grading system, the only couple of ALMOCs that we have had is to go and move from 1 to 5 to 1 to 4. So they are kind of following very clearly the structure we have in the AMC2 OROFC 231 Delta 1 for the alternate grading. In that AMC, we recommend, obviously, an ALMOC is required, so an approval process through the authority and the agency is needed. However, we clearly say that we recommend if you need to do that you clearly identify or have a transposition or a table in which you ensure that the level 1 to 5 is somehow you can translate that. And in these particular cases, what I see is that, or what we see is that they merge the grade 4 and 5 into grade 4. Okay, so they have a 4-point scale, but it's actually no change in the 1, no change in the 2, no change in the 3, and they are just merging the grade 4 and 5. Back to you, Ascanio, anything?
No, we had just had a comment on the ALTMOC to reconsider the ALTMOC after a certain period, not to resubmit the ALTMOC, but just to consider what we want to achieve is a commonality in Europe. And it's not easy, but we have to recall that EBT is a voluntary program. So maybe we should think about this and consider that more we can share, better we can implement EBT. But that's it.
Yeah, this is completely true. In those ALMOCs, we always recommend, because there's a good reason. All of these airlines had a good reason, specifically, we need to also ensure a common system when you jump from another system to EBT and from EBT to EBT baseline. And we want to ensure that to minimize the changes to the industry and to the airline. But we also recommended to the authority and to the airlines that maybe in 3 years' time, when the EBT is more mature, to think about going back to the EASA competency framework. There are a bunch of history that we cannot ignore, and sometimes for the sake of allowing the pilots a better transition, then it might be necessary to go to 1 to 4. But the long-term aim should be always to progress back to the EASA competency model and the grading system. Back to you, Adi.
Francisco Ascanio, thank you very much. That's great. And we're going to move on in a second to more the implementing side of things. So from a variation perspective, just to maybe summarize what we've talked about, it sounds like what IAS has seen so far is a small variation to the level 1 grading, the 1 to 4 scale, but otherwise it seems like the alignment is there for the level 0, level 2, level 3. Fantastic. And level 3, as you say, there's a chance to feedback from the industry in terms of best practices. So thank you for that. That's been a good discussion to highlight. I'm going to move on to implementing the grading system now. And Frank, I have a question for you. And one question came in from Romesh Da Silva asking whether or not examiners are skeptical about moving to the new grading system and to EBT. Could you maybe just give a couple of top tips to the audience regarding perhaps how you ensure instructor buy-in and how you make sure you bring the instructors along the journey with you? Just maybe 30 seconds to talk about that would be great.
I think you can explain it with one of the 9 competencies: communication. Communication is the main thing. So we tried to communicate every step of the implementation to the instructors, and we asked for feedback. And we had, for example, sessions where so we have an EBT team of 5 members. Where we went to the simulator and and helped the instructors with any issues they maybe had with the grading software or something like this. And so we supported them from every point of view, and from every feedback we got, we made an answer to them, and they saw that that they are supported, and then they are fine with the system, and then they,
Great, Brent, thank you. And I really like that idea of tying it into a competency, because I think that's a very good point, that communication is so important when it comes to the instructors and the other stakeholders in an EBT program. And there's many, as we all know, as end users. Ignacio, maybe just from your side, do you have any sort of other top tips you might suggest from the perspective of getting the buy-in for your instructors? Again, just a couple of seconds on that, or a couple of points.
Very quickly, yeah. The place to do this buy-in is during the initial train-the-trainer course. To me, this is paramount. So getting all the trainers over there and explaining them really well what is expected of them, what's going to be the system, making them part of all the procedures. And then once a year, the yearly standardization meeting, showing them all the figures, how they are doing, and making them participants all the time, so they have always all the information, obviously in a confidential way. And the trainers course is the starting point, is the paramount thing. If you are able to connect with the trainers from the very beginning in that course, then if they feel comfortable from then on, things usually happen really easy.
Thanks, Ignacio. That's great. So I suppose we could summarize that as being sort of 2 key words there, really, or a few keywords. One is the communication, like Frank said. And I think from your side, Ignacio, you're talking about the communication as early as possible in the process to get the buy-in right from day one. That sounds great. Frederick, maybe I'll hand back to you now, and I'll ask you a question to do so. From the NLR perspective, and Ignacio talked there a bit about train the trainer. What are you seeing from the NLR perspective in terms of perhaps the classic mistakes that are being made with regards to training instructors into a new grading system like we have with CBTA and EBT?
Well, I think some of the things that Frank and Ignacio already just mentioned are actually very valid, right? I mean, communication is by far key, and it's not just run the course and off they go. There's absolutely this recurrent process, and I think that is also that's definitely where I would focus on. I'd expand on that with the following. I think it's not just important to communicate with instructors, because you can do that in different ways, right? You could say, okay, well, here's the grading system. This is how it works, and good luck. That is communication. I'm not saying I think Frank and Ignacio do much more than that. But if we were to talk about pitfalls, it's important to take the instructor along into the philosophy. Why are we doing this? What's the thought behind the grading system? What's the reasoning behind root cause assessment? Why do we sit down for 10 minutes before we do the debriefing? What are we trying to achieve? And to understand that collecting information about the trainees is not just about grading and setting a grade and determining if they have a license or not. It's also about getting into them as people and saying, okay, well, this information is actually going to drive training. And that's actually a little bit of a different role for the information that we're collecting than before EBT. So as much as if you can get instructors into that philosophy, that's quite key. Another key point I think I'd mention is manage the transition, because within mixed, for instance, you might still have that. You might still have Appendix 9 items that you need to assess. There might still be LCL checks that you need to do. And with ATQP, there might also be items that you want to assess. It's important to bring instructors along to understand that there's a difference in these assessment methods. You don't assess the competency the same way you do an ATQP item. And if you can get them along on that, it's easier for them to segregate that. And as you transition into baseline and all that, the behaviors, the assessment behaviors will change as well. And the last thing I think is ICAP is really, I mean, I know that's something it's an area I've been working on, but I can't reiterate more enough. It's a learning process for the instructor. And there was a remark about from Jenny Taggart here as well. You know, do you take data along from instructors if they're quite fresh? I'd say take data from everybody, but make sure that you're continually checking if that data is valid in your ICAP program and being critical about what you're getting in. But it's very difficult to draw a line saying, you know, people are valid after that point. And that's actually what makes this for, right? There's 3 years to learn. So I think those are just a few points from my side. And maybe I'll just bounce it to Ascanio. Ascanio, from EASA's perspective, do you think there are different, let's say, different ICAP programs that you need for different types of grading systems? So would some grading systems need a more robust concordance or a standardization program than other grading systems? Do you have any thoughts on that from EASA's perspective?
Thank you, Frederick. Yeah, of course, we have to start from the consideration what is the aim of the ICAP. The ICAP is to identify those areas where the concordance is weak, and those areas have to be addressed by the organization to improve the quality of the data received. Now, of the grading system. Sorry. Now, always by the regulation, the ICAP has to be adapted to the size of the EBT program, as well as the instructors group. What the regulation doesn't say is that if you have different grading system, you have to have a different ICAP program. But I don't know, maybe Ignacio was highlighting this element before. If you have only grade from 1 to 3, it's much easier for you to have more concordance because you have only 3 grades to assess. But this doesn't tell you the full story. So to ensure the concordance and that then the observer behaviors, you have to ensure that instructors are assessing in the proper way the grade. So yeah, at the end, different grading system could require a different ICAP program implementation. And as we said, an ATMOC is welcome to EASA. We could address the grading system, but what we cannot address is the ICAP that the operator developed with the related new grading system.
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's also maybe this balance field between, you can simplify a system and you can increase your ICAP, or you can increase concordance because it might be easier, like you say, but then you might not get the amount of data that you need to actually prove that your program is effective. So there's, those are kind of two walls that you need to balance between. You need to have enough data to show that you can show improvement, but not so much that ICAP or concordance becomes a new possibility. All right, back to you, Andy.
You're muted, Andy.
Andy, you're muted.
Thanks, everyone. It always happens at some point, doesn't it? Almost got to the end without doing that. Let's stay with the EASA then, just for maybe a final question as we're coming to the end of the session now. So I'd like to ask it to Ascanio or to Francisco, actually. We've got into some of the nitty gritty of the grading. We've talked there about ICAP, so we're talking about the airline benefits of of the grading system with tailored training. If we could maybe just go back to a comment you made at the beginning in your presentation, Francisco, to do with sort of how EASA maybe sees that data. If we can have standardized data coming out of these airlines and coming to EASA in an anonymized way. You touched on the idea of data for safety. You mentioned the data reports. Would you maybe just be able to give the audience a little bit more insights into sort of what you may see that data having use for as it comes to EASA in the future in an anonymized way?
Yeah, so thank you, Andy. So we had extensive discussions in data for safety as well regarding the anonymized, de-identified, and on all those things. Obviously, I am not the expert. Maybe in the next EBT webinar, I need to invite Leo to give you a little bit of insight of this program. This program is in beta testing, but the idea is that it will be a huge database with a huge system in which we'll allow to drive conclusions out of the data. This data is not only about EBT; it's much bigger than EBT. And we are talking about manufacturers, airlines, ATM, meteorological, and everything. But yes, on that side, on data for safety, there's a lot of resources putting into that program, and we hope it is going to be very successful. And they will deal with the de-identification and with everything to drive conclusions. Obviously, that means that if the airlines participating in the data for safety and in general in the industry, they have the EBT competencies and the EBT grading system, the recommended grading system, then that data, that the identification, those conclusions will be much easier. That's why I insist. We know that in the continent there will be borders, but those borders will be easy to communicate rather than be in the middle of the ocean alone with your own competencies, your own data program, and your own grading system. Also, not only about data for safety, the agency is very interesting, and we have several discussions with Iberia, Lufthansa, and many others about the data and the conclusions extracted from this data. For us, it's much easier to understand and to drive conclusions with them, together with them in a bilateral. As you know, in the SPT 012, we have bilaterals with many companies. We've been having bilaterals with most of the mixed EBT airlines now, from Iceland to Spain to France to Luxembourg to Germany, of course. And that means that when we have those discussions, those bilaterals under the SPT 012, we are able to drive many more conclusions out of a grading system that is clear and is following the recommended practices. Finally, about the data report. With the data report occurs the same. At the moment, IATA is having this process. So at the moment is, let's say, at international level. That data report, like it happened in the past, it will somehow published and in which we are also participating. But at some point in time, that data report, that version 2 of the data report will be published. And then here in Europe, we will need to take this information and produce or amend if that will be the case in Europe. And for that, obviously, we will take into account the opinion of our industry, meaning the European industry, and if they are standardized. And when that discussion happens, it will be much easier when we have more or less in the same table, everybody with the same. And then finally, I want to go back to the member states. They are the ones implementing this regulation, they're responsible of this regulation. And obviously for an authority, it's much easier when they have two operators with the same grading system, and they can extract, conclusions and exchange information, and how within the member state how transparent it could be sometimes the information, and that will happen if there's let's say an equivalency or the same grading system and same competency model. Back to you. I think we have 1 minute. We can delay a little bit. I don't know if Frederick would like to do the conclusion, and then we take over, and then we finish at 35 or between 35 and 40.
Francisco, thanks for your answer. We'll just quickly, as you say, we're up to time now, 29. So we're just going to share a couple of takeaways that we've captured throughout this this webinar today. So thank you to the other panelists, to EASA, and also to all the attendees for asking the questions on behalf of myself and Frederick. Here's some of our key takeaways, just to leave you with a bit of food for thought. So we have, don't reinvent the wheel. It's best to begin with the EASA framework, at least to begin with. EASA, you can see, are quite keen to hear from the industry, but it's good to start with the standard. Data privacy must be balanced with pilot development. Quality versus quantity. Bad grading equals bad data. So ensure you have quality data over quantity. I think we heard that both from Frank and from Ignacio today. Pilot development, grade for trends, not just for snapshots. A big part now of EBT is also the trends over time. And you saw some of the insights that Ignacio mentioned earlier, particularly about that. And finally, as we saw from NLR, also from Lufthansa and Iberia, take time to train and support your instructors with the grading. That's going to be the key to this and the heart of your EBT system going forwards. Thank you, Francisco and Ascanio. Back to you now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Frederick. It was very well done. Thank you to the presenters, to Ascanio, to Ignacio, and to Frank as well for those presentations. Again, we were many of us today. Unfortunately, it's time to say goodbye. We have recorded this session. I'm going to hand over to John. He's going to provide you the location of the presentations, because I think they are pretty much available now, or at least some of them. And then he will mention as well about the recording, where to find the record of this session, and then the next steps and the next EBT webinars, because those EBT webinars will continue throughout the year. So, hand it to you. Thank you, John.
Thanks very much, Francisco, and thanks to everybody, all the panelists and all the presenters for an awesome job. We got lots of great comments in the chat, and a lot of people were emailing me throughout the event with different things. So hopefully, we certainly get the feeling lots of people got loads of value out of this discussion. In terms of the information, so we have the EASA event page where we'll upload things, kind of the official kind of records later on. But specifically, what we've done already is on the EASA AirOps community site. There's a specific page. If you go into topics or into the A to Z, there's a specific topic about evidence-based training. And on that page, we have already, before the recording from the last event and the link to that on YouTube and the presentations, but we've already uploaded certainly the Francisco and Ascanio's presentation, the one from Lufthansa. The others will get uploaded as quickly as possible. And then we'll turn around in the next 24 hours, ideally, certainly hopefully by Friday morning. We've got an IT upgrade coming on Thursday evening, so it might take a little bit longer to turn around the video recording. We'll probably post it in the 3 sessions, because we know there's nothing harder than trying to find something, you know, in a 3-hour recording. So we'll do them as the 3 sessions. We'll edit them down a little bit just to make them easier to find. We'll post those on the page, and also there'll be a link to them where they are on the Together for Safety YouTube channel as well. So we'll put it in multiple places to make it as easy as possible to find. What we'll also do on Friday, and we'll email these, we have obviously through the registrations, everybody's contact details. So we'll drop an email out as well to everybody once this is available, is then the registration for the 3rd webinar that we'll have on the 29th of October. And then obviously with follow-up information of where everything is on the recordings. And then also in December, there'll be then a 4th webinar focusing on malfunctions. And again, we'll post the link to register for that fairly soon as well. So hopefully that's everything. I don't know if there's anything else. Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks for joining us again. And we'll sign off now and wish you all a good week and safe flying. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.